I woke up. My head hurts. The bed is too soft. The quilt slips like water. I prop myself up. The four walls glare white. This isn't my rented room. I throw off the covers and step onto the thick carpet barefoot, making no sound. I walk toward the enormous full-length mirror. In the mirror is a stranger's face, very pretty, with a pointed chin and skin so pale it's almost translucent, but there are dark circles under the eyes. And the lips lack color, messy hair tangles over the shoulders. I raise my hand. The reflection raises hers, slender fingers, nails neatly trimmed and polished pale pink, a faint ring mark on the ring finger. My heart is pounding violently. This isn't me. The bathroom is larger. The enormous jacuzzi resembles a small swimming pool. I turn on the faucet, scoop up cold water, and splash it on my face. It's icy cold. Looking up at the mirror, droplets trickle down that unfamiliar face. The eyes are empty. This isn't a dream. I walk out of the bedroom. The corridor stretches endlessly. There's some movement downstairs, gripping the cold stair railing. I descend. The living room is terrifyingly vast, with floor-to-ceiling windows revealing a meticulously trimmed garden. A middle-aged woman in dark uniform stands at the center, holding a dust cloth. Seeing me, she freezes momentarily before lowering her gaze. "Madam, you're awake. Breakfast is ready in the small dining room." "Madam," I mumbled an in response. She gestured toward a direction. The small dining room was absurdly large too. Only one set of tableware was placed on the long dining table: milk, fried eggs, toast, and a few slices of fruit. I pulled out the chair and sat down. The food wasn't steaming at all. The woman stood not far away, waiting with her hands clasped. "Where's Edward?" I heard myself ask. The name slipped out naturally. "The young master is upstairs in the nursery, with Kathy keeping him company." The woman replied in a flat tone, "Madam, Mr. James called this morning." "Mr. James," another unfamiliar name. I nodded absently and picked up the milk glass. It was cold. A wave of discomfort churned in my stomach. I set the glass down. "I'll go check on Edward." The nursery was at the other end of the hallway. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open gently. A very young woman was sitting on a small sofa, scrolling through her phone. When she saw me, she hurriedly stood up, shoving her phone into her pocket. "Madam," I ignored her. My gaze fell on the carpet in the center of the room. A very small boy sat with his back to me, surrounded by brightly colored building blocks. He was wearing tiny blue overalls, and the hair at the nape of his neck was soft and slightly blonde. He was intently trying to place a triangular block on top of a wobbly tower, his little hands unsteady. His lips were pursed slightly in concentration. "Is this Edward, my son?" The thought surfaced, and my heart suddenly clenched with an unfamiliar, dull ache. I walked over and crouched beside him. The carpet was soft. Sensing someone's presence, he slowly turned his head. His eyes were large, clear, and bright, like black grapes soaked in water. He looked at me without any expression. No curiosity, no fear, no warmth. Just looking, a blank, unsettling silence. This wasn't the gaze of a 3-year-old. Too quiet, quiet enough to unsettle the heart. "Edward." I tried calling his name, my voice slightly hoarse. He didn't respond much. Just turned his head back and continued staring at his block tower. His small hand reached out, gently touching the wobbling block at the very top. The tower collapsed. A few blocks scattered with a clatter. He didn't cry or fuss, just looked at the scattered blocks, his tiny shoulders seeming to slump ever so slightly. Kathy beside him quickly spoke up. "The young master has been playing for a while. He might be a little tired." "Madam, should we give him some water?" I shook my head. "You can leave first." Kathy hesitated for a moment before quietly stepping out and gently closing the door. Only the unusually quiet little boy and I remained in the room. Sunlight streamed through the large window, casting a faint golden halo on his fine, soft hair. The air carried a subtle milky scent typical of young children. I looked at him. An overwhelming sense of absurdity and panic engulfed me. Who was this? Where was I? Whose wife had I become? And who was this child? I stood up. My legs slightly numb, my gaze swept across the room and landed on a white low cabinet against the wall. The bottom drawer wasn't fully closed, revealing a corner of dark leather binding. As if compelled by some unseen force, I walked over and pulled open that drawer. It was very empty inside, only a thick hardcover notebook, dark brown, without any patterns. I took it out. It was heavy. The cover felt cool and smooth to the touch. I sat down on the small sofa. Edward was still fiddling with scattered building blocks, seemingly completely immersed in his own world. I opened the notebook. On the title page, a name was written in elegant handwriting, Freya, Freya. I silently repeated, "Is that my name?" Keep flipping through. It's a diary. The handwriting alternates between messy and neat, and the ink varies in shade. March 15th. Sunny, he didn't come home again. Couldn't reach him by phone. I know where he is. That woman named Sunny. How dare she? I'm Spencer's lawfully wedded wife. Edward is his son. How could he do this to us? April 2nd. Cloudy, Edward has a fever again. Cried all night. So annoying. Where's Spencer? His assistant said he's on a business trip. Bullshit. Kathy was holding the baby to soothe him, and as I looked at that little face so much like Spencer's, all I felt was hatred. If it weren't for this child, if it weren't for him, how could my life have turned out like this? I pinched his arm hard. And he cried even louder. Annoying. So damn annoying. May 10th. Rainy. That bitch Sunny. She actually dared to wear that necklace at the charity gala. The one I wanted. The one Spencer bought. He actually bought it for her. Everyone saw. Everyone was laughing at me. I became the biggest joke. Came home and took it out on Edward. He cowered in the corner like a frightened little mouse. Serves him right. Who told him to be Spencer's son? June 18th. Sunny. Took Edward out today and ran into that woman at the mall. She was clinging to Spencer's arm, laughing so brightly it stung my eyes. Spencer didn't even glance at Edward. I was furious. Locked Edward on the balcony when we got home. He pounded on the glass door. His little face pressed against it as he cried. I didn't care. Let him cry. Let him understand his father abandoned him because he wasn't good enough. It's all his fault. July 3rd. Thunderstorm. Spencer's lawyer came. He wants a divorce. For that bitch. He's throwing us away. Over my dead body. I'll never sign. Edward's coughing again, giving me a headache. Tell him to stay away from me. Get lost. August 1st. Overcast. Took the medicine. Feeling a bit better. Doctor prescribed it. Said my emotions are too unstable. Ha, unstable. Who wouldn't be after all this? Edward was quiet today. Sat in the corner drawing by himself. Drew 3 stick figures. Pointed at one and said, "Mommy." I looked at him and suddenly thought, this child, maybe isn't so detestable. No, Freya, what are you thinking? He's Spencer's spawn. He ruined you. The further I flipped, the more erratic and frenzied the handwriting became, sentences jumbled with venom, despair, and drug-induced haze. The last few pages, dated half a month ago, held only one crooked line, the ink bleeding deeply into the paper. Go to hell, all of you, let's burn together, freedom. The notebook slipped from my trembling hands and landed on the carpet with a soft thud. A tidal wave of overwhelming information crashed over me, freezing me in place. I transmigrated into a book. I had transmigrated into a modern romance novel I just finished reading, one I'd complained about for its unbelievably dumb villainess. She became that tragic, malicious female antagonist. Freya, in the story, Freya came from an ordinary background and married into the wealthy James family through her beauty and cunning, giving birth to a son named Edward, but she was greedy, jealous, and extremely controlling. Especially unable to tolerate her husband Spencer's lingering affection for his first love, Sunny, she vented all her resentment toward her husband onto her innocent son Edward, frequently resorting to beatings, emotional neglect, and psychological abuse. In the end, her madness escalated, and she attempted to set the villa on fire during Spencer's confrontation with Sunny, intending to perish together. The fire was extinguished in time. But Freya was imprisoned for arson and intentional harm. Edward was injured in the chaos. Meanwhile, Edward, the child who had endured long-term abuse from his mother and neglect from his father, was severely traumatized by the fire, completely shutting himself off and never speaking again. In the ending, Spencer and Sunny lived happily together, occasionally mentioning their severely autistic son who required special care, in charity reports, earning widespread sympathy and praise. Edward became nothing more than a silent backdrop in the protagonists' happy lives, a tool used to highlight their kindness. And now, I am Freya, who is about to descend into madness and destruction. The notebook lying on the carpet is the countdown to her madness and ruin. A chill shot up from the soles of my feet to the top of my head. I suddenly turned my gaze to the small figure in the center of the carpet. Edward was reaching out his tiny hands, slowly gathering the scattered blocks together. His movements were slow and focused. The sunlight illuminated his lowered eyelashes, casting faint shadows on his pale little face, so small, so quiet, the ending in the book pierced my mind like an ice pick. Completely sealed off, no longer speaking. Was it because of the impending madness ignited by his own mother? Or was it because the daily abuse and indifference had already shattered his world beyond repair? I couldn't breathe. My chest ached unbearably. No, absolutely not. Damn Spencer, damn Sonny, damn all those wealthy family feuds and tragic love stories. Me, Freya, now I only want to do one thing, live well, stay far away from all that messy drama and those lunatics, dragging along this little burden named Edward. Zen, yes, Zen, parenting, just focus on parenting, raise the kid well, just consider it as the heavens taking pity on me for working too much overtime in my past life. Sending me here on a long vacation to raise a child, the goal instantly became crystal clear. Avoid the original plot, save my own skin, and incidentally, try to raise this autistic, marginalized child by my side well. I took a deep breath, suppressing the sourness in my throat and the trembling in my fingertips. Bending down, I picked up that heavy diary, filled with all the sins and madness of the original owner. This thing couldn't stay. I took the notebook and walked into the small attached bathroom, lifting the toilet lid. I tore the pages out one by one, shredding them into pieces before tossing them in. I pressed the flush handle. The water roared as it swept away those paper fragments filled with resentment, swirling them into oblivion. Watching the last scrap disappear, I let out a sigh of relief. It felt like flushing away some kind of ominous curse. Returning to the room, Edward was still struggling with his building blocks. He seemed to be trying to rebuild a tower, but kept failing. His little face showed no expression, save for the faint furrow of his brows betraying a barely perceptible frustration. I walked over and sat down beside him, keeping a slight distance. The carpet was soft. Edward, I tried to soften my voice, though it still sounded a bit dry. Would you like to go for a walk? Edward paused mid-motion. He lifted his head. Those overly quiet large eyes looking at me with a trace of confusion and the faintest hint of wariness. He didn't answer, just kept looking at me. Outside, there are flowers. I struggled to recall the garden I'd seen through the floor-to-ceiling window earlier. There are trees, and, a slide. I remembered spotting what seemed like a small playground structure in a corner of the garden, visible from the children's room window in the distance. Edward's eyelashes fluttered slightly. He lowered his head, his small hand unconsciously clutching a red square block. Silence. Just as I thought he wouldn't respond, he gave an almost imperceptibly slight nod, so subtle it was nearly invisible. It was enough, more than enough. I stood up and reached out my hand to him. He looked at my hand, then at my face, his big eyes filled with confusion. The original Freya had probably never offered him her hand before, let alone taken him out to play. He hesitated for a long time. So long that my arm began to ache. Finally, he slowly put down the building blocks and extended his tiny, soft hand, tentatively placing it lightly on my 2 fingers, warm, soft to the touch. My heart seemed to be scalded by this small warmth. Let's go, I said, holding his soft little hand. I walked out of the nursery to find Kathy waiting outside, looking slightly surprised. Madam, are you taking the young master out? Yes. The garden, I replied succinctly. Very well. Let me fetch you a coat. It's a bit breezy outside. Kathy hurried off to get one. I glanced down at Edward. He was wearing overalls and a small shirt, which weren't exactly thin, but I didn't stop Kathy. She quickly returned with a light beige cardigan and knelt to help Edward into it. Give it to me. I took it from him. Squatting down, I draped the cardigan over Edward's small shoulders. His body seemed to stiffen momentarily, but he didn't pull away. Clumsily, I fastened the 2 buttons on his chest. He stood obediently, eyes lowered, his long lashes casting shadows. After buttoning him up, I took his hand again. Let's go. The sunlight was warm and comforting as it bathed us. The air carried the scent of grass and faint floral notes. Holding Edward's tiny hand, we walked along the smooth pebbled path. He moved slowly, head bowed, seemingly engrossed in watching his small shoes step over each rounded stone. I matched his pace without speaking. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves in the wind and the occasional clear chirping of birds. He walked to that small children's play area, the brightly colored slide, little swings, and mini climbing frame. Edward's footsteps halted, his gaze drawn to that tiny slide. Go play. I released his hand and pointed at the slide. He looked at the slide, then back at me, his eyes filled with uncertainty. Go ahead, Mommy's right here, I said. The self-reference slipped out awkwardly. Carrying an unfamiliar discomfort, Edward hesitated for a few more seconds, then slowly inched forward step by step. He didn't immediately climb the slide but instead extended his small hand, cautiously touching the cool plastic edge of the slide, as if confirming something. Then, clumsily and using both hands and feet, he began to climb the short steps. He climbed very slowly, very deliberately. Upon reaching the top, he sat down and looked below. His small figure sitting high up appeared somewhat lonely. He didn't move, just sat there. I stood where I was, neither urging him nor stepping forward, just watching him. After a long while, he finally moved. His little bottom wiggled forward slightly. Then, extremely slowly, he slid down the slide. The speed was so slow, it was almost a crawl. Reaching the bottom, he stood up and patted his little pants. He didn't smile, nor did he look back at me. Just turned around and slowly climbed up the steps again, and so, over and over, he silently climbed the slide and silently slid down. His movements remained slow and focused all the while. The sunlight shone on the soft crown of his head. I found a bench in the shade of a nearby tree and sat down, quietly watching him repeat this simple action again and again. The world seemed to shrink to the faint sounds of his climbing and sliding. He stopped after countless repetitions. Instead of climbing the steps again, he stood still, head bowed, staring at his toes. His small silhouette exuded an indescribable weariness and confusion. I stood up and walked over, tired. He looked up at me. Tiny beads of sweat dotted his forehead. Want some water? I pulled out his cartoon water bottle from the small backpack Kathy had prepared. He nodded. I unscrewed the cap and handed him the water bottle. Holding it with both small hands, he took slow, careful sips. Drinking very deliberately. After he finished, I put the water bottle away. Seeing his sweat-dampened bangs, I hesitated for a moment before pulling out a pack of tissues from my pocket. Kathy had just stuffed them into my hand earlier. I took one out and, somewhat stiffly, gently wiped his forehead and temples. His body tensed again, but he didn't pull away. Going home? I asked. He nodded again. On the way back, he still walked slowly, keeping his head down to watch the path. But I felt that the grip of his tiny fingers around mine seemed slightly tighter than when we had come. In the evening, the enormous dining table still seated only Edward and me. We sat at one end of the long table, far apart. The dishes were exquisite but lacked warmth. Edward quietly ate the finely chopped food Kathy had placed in his bowl, using his small spoon and fork. His movements were slow and meticulous, barely making a sound. I had little appetite and only picked at my food. My gaze lingered on Edward. He ate so quietly, so properly, unlike a child just over 3 years old. Edward, I put down my chopsticks. Tomorrow, is there anywhere you'd like to go? He stopped chewing, raised his little face to look at me, his eyes still holding that vacant calm. It seemed he was trying hard to understand what the word play might mean to him. Or, would you like to see where other children play? I tentatively asked. The Edward in the book, due to Freya's twisted mindset, had almost no contact with the outside world, let alone visited places like playgrounds or early education centers that ordinary children frequent. The original owner seemed intent on keeping him locked in this gilded cage, using him as a tool to defy Spencer and vent her resentment. Edward blinked, his long lashes fluttering like tiny fans. He lowered his head and continued slowly scooping rice grains from his bowl with his spoon. No response. Silence fell once again. Kathy whispered softly beside me, "Madam, the young master hasn't been out much before." I know, my heart felt unbearably heavy. "Tomorrow," I said, looking at Edward's bowed little head, "we'll go out for breakfast. We'll have wonton soup." Okay, I remembered there seemed to be a fairly clean-looking breakfast spot not far outside the residential area. Edward's little hand holding the spoon froze. He looked up at me again, his big eyes reflecting for the first time a faint glimmer of something unmistakably called confusion. He seemed not to understand what eating breakfast outside or little wontons meant. All right, I made the decision for him. Tomorrow morning, we'll go eat little wontons. The next morning, I didn't sleep in. As soon as the alarm went off, I got up. After washing up, I put on a simple t-shirt and jeans, tying my hair into a casual ponytail. Looking at my face in the mirror, still pretty but without heavy makeup, appearing a bit pale, it felt much more agreeable. Walking into Edward's room, Kathy was helping him get dressed. The little one was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, drowsy-eyed. his small head nodding slightly like a sleepy little penguin. Kathy had dressed him in a light blue hooded sweatshirt and khaki pants. "Madam, are you really taking the young master out for breakfast?" Kathy still seemed worried. "The food outside might not be very clean. Everything is already prepared at home. It's fine, a change of taste once in a while." I walked over, all dressed. Edward rubbed his eyes, trying hard to keep them open as he looked at me, and nodded. "Let's go then." I reached out my hand to him. This time, he didn't seem as hesitant as yesterday. His small hand stretched out and lightly grasped 3 of my fingers. A warm touch. Stepping through that heavy, ornate gate, symbolizing both wealth and confinement, the air outside felt fresher and freer. The sunlight was just right, spilling onto the clean community path. Holding Edward's tiny hand, we walked slowly along the sidewalk. He still moved at a leisurely pace, but his little head was slightly raised now, curiously observing the unfamiliar surroundings, the green street trees, cars of various colors parked by the roadside, and the occasional morning jogger passing by. The breakfast shop was right on the street corner. The storefront wasn't large, but its windows were bright and clean. Red characters on the glass door read, "Handmade wontons." It wasn't yet rush hour, so the shop wasn't crowded. Pushing open the door, a wave of warmth mingled with the aroma of food and the buzz of human activity rushed toward us. The crispy scent of fried dough sticks, the rich fragrance of soy milk, and, the savory broth of wonton soup. Edward's tiny hand instantly tightened around my finger, clearly unaccustomed to such clamor. Though the crowd was sparse, the clatter of pots and pans and the low murmurs of diners were already overwhelming for him. His wide eyes filled with tension and confusion in an instant, his small body instinctively shrinking closer to my leg. "Don't be afraid," I whispered, pulling him closer as we settled into a corner booth by the wall. The setup was simple, plastic chairs and tables. A middle-aged woman wearing an apron and radiating cheerful energy approached with a menu. "What'll you two have?" "Oh my, what a handsome little one," she beamed warmly at Edward. Edward immediately buried his face in my arm, leaving only a fluffy back of his head visible to the woman. 2 small bowls of wontons, 1 small one. I placed my order, coming right up. "Just a moment." The auntie swiftly noted it down, glanced at the huddled Edward, and walked away with a smile. While waiting for the wontons, Edward stayed pressed close to me, his little head buried and refusing to lift up. His tiny body was tense tight. I could feel his nervousness. "Look," I pointed at the slightly faded cartoon poster on the wall. "Peppa Pig." The pink Peppa and her little brother George were jumping in muddy puddles in the picture. Edward's little head finally lifted slightly, timidly glancing at the painting on the wall in the direction I pointed. After just one look, he quickly buried his head again. The wontons were soon served, a small white porcelain bowl with clear broth sprinkled with scallions and a bit of seaweed, filled with plump, thin-skinned wontons stuffed generously with filling, steaming temptingly. The aunt thoughtfully placed a small plastic spoon in Edward's bowl. "Be careful, it's hot, little one," the aunt said as she set down the bowl, smiling at Edward again. Edward still kept his head down. "Thank you," I said to the auntie. The auntie walked away. I picked up Edward's small spoon, scooped up a wonton, blew on it to cool it down, and then held it up to his mouth. "Edward, want to try?" His little head moved slightly, revealing one eye. He quickly glanced at the plump, white wonton on the spoon, then looked at me. His eyes were filled with struggle and hesitation. "Smells good," I said, nudging the spoon a little closer. He hesitated for a long time. His little nose seemed to lightly sniff the aroma of food in the air. Finally, with extreme slowness and caution, he opened his tiny mouth and took the dumpling inside. He began chewing carefully. I watched him nervously. He chewed a few times, his little cheeks puffing slightly. Then, he swallowed. His face still showed no expression, but his body seemed to relax just a bit. He reached out himself and grasped the handle of the small plastic spoon. I let go of his hand, mimicking my actions. He clumsily used the spoon to scoop a dumpling from the bowl. It took several attempts before he successfully scooped one up, trembling slightly as he brought it to his mouth. He blew on it cautiously, though barely any air came out, then began eating it in small, careful bites. His movements were slow and deliberate, as if performing a solemn ritual. I picked up my spoon and started eating my own bowl. The taste was indeed good, with a very flavorful broth. Out of the corner of my eye, I kept watching Edward. He was focused on tackling the wontons in his bowl, one after another, his small spoon growing steadier with each bite. Fine beads of sweat gradually appeared on his forehead, and his little face flushed slightly from both the heat and his concentration. He took a long time finishing that small bowl of wontons. When only a bit of broth remained at the bottom, he set down his spoon, his little belly seeming to bulge ever so slightly. He looked up at me, in those overly quiet big eyes of his. There was now clearly reflected a glimmer of contentment, and also a tiny, almost imperceptible spark of something like novelty. He didn't smile, but I knew he didn't dislike being here. Full, I asked. He nodded. Is it good? He looked into my eyes and nodded again, very slowly. The movement was slightly more pronounced than before. Shall we come again next time? He blinked, his long lashes fluttering like butterfly wings. Then, he nodded once more, stepping out of the breakfast diner. The warm sunlight bathed us. Edward's little hand still held onto my finger. He no longer kept his head bowed nervously as he had on the way here. Instead, he lifted it slightly, quietly observing the small shops lining the street, the toys displayed in the windows, and the chirping birds perched in the trees. His steps remained slow, but each one was planted firmly. After returning home, I shut myself in the study. The massive desk stood before floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with hardcover books, pristine as decorations. I turned on the computer and began searching. Keywords: 3.5-year-old child, language development delay, social communication disorder, intervention methods. The screen flooded with information, ads for institutions, expert articles, parent forums. I scrolled through them one by one. The jargon made my head spin. But the parents' shared experiences, those descriptions of silent, resistant children struggling to connect with the world, pierced my heart like needles. In the book, Edward became completely mute and withdrawn after the fire, but now, none of that has happened yet. He hasn't been utterly destroyed by those raging flames. He can still nod, express faint emotions with his eyes, and accept new things from the outside world. Like wonton soup, is there still a chance? Once this thought took root, it grew wildly in my heart. I picked up my phone, the latest model smartphone of this era, with features so complex they were dizzying. With some effort, I found a number in my contacts labeled Peter's secretary, probably someone from Spencer's side. I dialed the number. After a few rings, the call was answered by a young, efficient male voice. Madam, hello, how may I assist you? Secretary Peter. I tried to keep my voice calm. Could you please help me look into reputable intervention institutions or special education teachers in the city or surrounding areas that focus on language and social development for young children? They need to be formal, professional, and patient. There was silence on the other end of the line for several seconds. Clearly, this request fell outside Secretary Peter's understanding of Madame Freya. The original owner of this body would only call to track Spencer's whereabouts or cause trouble for Sonny. Understood, Madam. Secretary Peter's voice quickly regained its professional composure. I'll look into it immediately and send you the compiled information as soon as it's ready. Hurry up. Thanks. I hung up the phone. Just as I put down my phone, there was a gentle knock on the study door. Come in. The door opened, and Kathy stood there with a hesitant look on her face. Madam. There's something. Speak. It's about young master starting kindergarten. Kathy seemed a bit nervous. Previously, Mr. James mentioned it several times, saying the young master has reached the age and should consider enrolling. But you always said the young master was physically weak, afraid he might get bullied, and wanted to wait until he was older. After that, Mr. James stopped bringing it up. Kindergarten. I froze for a moment. Right? Edward is 3.5 years old. Normal children his age should be attending kindergarten, but the original Freya, how could she possibly feel at ease letting Edward go out? She practically wanted to lock Edward by her side as both a bargaining chip and an emotional punching bag. That excuse about him being physically weak and afraid of bullying was nothing but selfishness. Which kindergarten did Mr. James suggest? I asked. This, Mr. James didn't mention specific names, but he did bring up a few, well, rather expensive private international kindergartens. Kathy answered cautiously. They have excellent security and facilities. International kindergartens, elite education. I sneered inwardly. Throwing a child like Edward, who has social difficulties, directly into that kind of environment would be no different from pushing him into a pack of wolves. Expensive tuition fees can't buy genuine acceptance and understanding. I see. I nodded. I'll think about this. You can go now. Kathy breathed a sigh of relief and left the room. I leaned back in the spacious leather chair, gazing at the meticulously trimmed lawn outside the window. A prestigious kindergarten like that. No, what Edward needs isn't a gilded cage, nor the constant comparison and potential exclusion from a group of future elite children. He needs an environment that can embrace his differences, where he can relax and be given the time and patience to gradually integrate. An ordinary, warm, down-to-earth kindergarten, perhaps that would be better. This thought grew increasingly clear. In the afternoon, Peter, my secretary, worked with remarkable efficiency. A neatly compiled document arrived in my inbox, listing contact details, introductions, and some parent reviews for 3 institutions and an independent special education studio. I read through it carefully. Finally, my gaze settled on the introduction of that independent studio. The person in charge was surnamed Chin, a woman with overseas special education experience. After returning to China, she opened her own studio, specializing in language and social initiation for young children with special needs. Reviews mentioned her patience, flexible methods, and emphasis on interactive play. Most importantly, her studio was very small, with a relaxed atmosphere, more like a large playroom. This is the one. I immediately dialed the appointment number for Teacher Wendy's studio. The call was answered by an assistant with a gentle voice. I briefly explained the situation. My child was 3.5 years old, with delayed language development, low social engagement, and extreme quietness. I understand. Many parents face similar concerns initially. The assistant replied warmly. Teacher Wendy has an opening this Friday afternoon. Would you be able to bring your child in for an initial observation and discussion? Convenient. I agreed without hesitation. After hanging up the phone, I felt slightly more at ease. Leaving the study, I wanted to check on Edward. Passing by the door of the children's room, I heard Kathy's gentle voice inside, seemingly reading a picture book. I quietly pushed the door open. Edward was sitting on the carpet, his back to the door, hugging a soft brown teddy bear plush toy. Kathy sat beside him, holding a picture book and pointing at an apple on the page, reading, "Red, Big Apple." Edward wasn't looking at the picture book. He lowered his head, his small fingers unconsciously picking at the seams of the teddy bear, but he was listening. His tiny body leaned slightly toward Kathy's direction. Kathy finished reading a page and paused. The room was quiet. "Edward," Kathy asked softly, "what color is the apple?" Edward's fidgeting with the doll stopped momentarily. His little head remained bowed. Several seconds of silence passed. Just when I thought there would be no response, an extremely faint, almost breath-like voice softly drifted out. "Red." The voice was so quiet, so small that if you didn't hold your breath and focus, you might almost miss it. Kathy's eyes instantly widened, her face filled with unbelievable joy. She looked excitedly toward me at the door. I heard it too, like a tiny spark, unexpectedly falling into the lake of the heart. Instantly igniting a glimmer of light, he spoke. He said, "Red," though it was just one word, though the voice was so soft and faint, but those were meaningful syllables he actively uttered. I stood at the door, my heart pounding in my chest, an uncontrollable warmth surging into my eyes, bringing a slight sting. I took a deep breath, suppressing that unfamiliar flutter, and didn't go in to disturb them, gently closing the door. I leaned against the cold wall for a while. So this is what it feels like to hear a silent child speak, more overwhelming than signing multi-million-dollar deals, more than buying the most expensive bag. On Friday afternoon, I took Edward and found Teacher Wendy's studio according to the address. It was located in a pleasant, quiet neighborhood, not a luxury apartment, but a ground-floor unit with a small yard. White picket fences surrounded the space, with flowers and plants growing in the yard, along with a tiny sandpit and a mini swing. The door was open, and cheerful children's music drifted out from inside. Holding Edward's hand, I walked in. The interior was spacious, with soft, colorful mats covering the floor and walls painted in warm, soothing tones. It was divided into several areas: a reading corner filled with picture books and toys, a dollhouse stocked with pretend play items, and an art zone equipped with easels and small tables and chairs. The overall atmosphere was bright, warm, and relaxing. A young woman wearing a light blue linen dress, her hair tied in a low ponytail, approached us with a gentle, friendly smile, her eyes crinkling warmly. "You must be Ms. Freya and little Edward." "I'm Wendy." "Hello, Teacher Wendy." I nodded and looked down at Edward. He was clearly captivated by this unfamiliar yet colorful environment. his big eyes curiously scanning around. His tiny hand tightly gripping my finger. "Hello, Edward." Wendy crouched down, bringing her gaze level with his, her voice softening even more. "Welcome to play here. There are lots of fun toys. Would you like to see them?" Edward glanced at her, then at me, not moving, but the tension in his eyes seemed to ease slightly. "Edward, Teacher Wendy has many toys here." I gently squeezed his little hand. "Go take a look. Mommy will stay here with you." Edward hesitated for a moment, his tiny fingers releasing mine. Instead of running away immediately, he slowly shuffled step by step toward the nearest area with wooden train tracks. He crouched down, stretched out his little hand, and gingerly touched a small red wooden train. Wendy didn't approach him right away. She just stood a short distance away, watching him gently, occasionally murmuring a soft word or two. "That's a little train. It goes choo-choo when it moves. Look, there are building blocks over there too. You can stack them into tall towers." Edward picked up the little red train, placed it on the track, and gave it a gentle push. The train slid a short distance along the track. He watched, then, he pushed it again. Only then did Wendy slowly walk over and sit down not far from him. She picked up another small blue train, placed it on a different track, and gave it a light push. The two little trains glided along their tracks. Edward glanced at the blue train Wendy was pushing, then looked at the red train in his own hands, lowered his head, and continued to focus on pushing his own. Wendy didn't disturb him either, only occasionally pushing her own blue train or picking up a block to place beside it. Her movements were slow, quiet, barely noticeable, yet somehow comforting. I sat watching from the small sofa nearby. Time passed slowly. Edward went from playing only with his little train to occasionally stealing glances at the blocks Wendy was stacking. Until eventually, Wendy handed him a triangular block and softly said, "Edward, this needs a roof." He hesitated for a moment, then actually took it and carefully placed it atop the house Wendy had built. No words were exchanged, yet a silent interaction flowed between them. As the hour-long observation period was nearing its end, Wendy took out several large cards with simple illustrations: an apple, a banana, a puppy, a kitten, the sun, and the moon. Holding up the card with the apple, she placed it in front of Edward and asked, "Edward, what is this?" Edward kept his head down, playing with a building block in his hand. "Apple, a red apple," Wendy said patiently, her voice as soft as a feather. Edward didn't respond. Wendy wasn't in a hurry either. She placed the card on the floor mat beside him and picked up the puppy card. "Woof woof, puppy." Edward paused for a moment. He looked up and glanced at the puppy card. "Puppy," Wendy repeated again. Edward pursed his little lips, as if gathering strength. A few seconds later, that faint breathy sound emerged again. "Dog." Wendy's eyes lit up, her smile growing even warmer. "Yes, puppy, Edward is so clever." She picked up the sun card again. "Sun, bright and warm." Edward gazed at the golden sun without uttering a word. Wendy didn't press further and put away the card. The observation period had ended. As she escorted us to the door, Wendy said to me, "Ms. Freya, based on my initial observation of Edward, his language comprehension and cognitive abilities might be slightly better than what we've seen. His challenges manifest more in his willingness to express himself and social initiative. He's quite sensitive to external stimuli and lacks a strong sense of security. What he needs is a very inclusive, low-pressure environment where he can relax and feel safe and accepted. Only then will his inner willingness gradually emerge." The fact that he produced 2 sounds today is a very positive sign. "So, do you think he's suitable for a regular kindergarten?" I asked, voicing my biggest concern. Wendy pondered for a moment. "In terms of ability, he has a solid foundation, but in regular kindergartens, even in the younger classes, there are usually many children with relatively fixed environments and rules. If the teachers lack experience or patience, and there are too many children to care for adequately, Edward might feel overwhelmed and withdraw further, even developing resistance. Personally, I'd recommend transitioning first in a smaller intervention setting like ours or an inclusive preschool. Once he feels more secure and expresses himself more willingly, we can consider transferring him to a regular kindergarten." She paused, then added, "Of course, this is just my suggestion. The final decision is yours. If you do plan to send him to a regular kindergarten, make sure to communicate thoroughly with the principal and teachers about his situation to secure as much understanding and support as possible. The choice of environment is crucial for him." "I understand. Thank you." Teacher Wendy, I carefully noted down her advice. Edward is a very sensitive child, but he also has his own inner rhythm. Wendy glanced at Edward, who was standing quietly beside Kathy holding her hand. Her gaze tender, give him time and trust, he'll surprise us. He did really well today. On the way back, I kept pondering Wendy's words. Large private international kindergarten, directly ruled out. Regular public kindergarten, too many children, limited teacher attention, too risky. So, is there any smaller scale kindergarten with a relaxed atmosphere, caring teachers, and fewer children? I opened my phone again and started searching keywords. Small private kindergarten, family-style childcare, emphasis on individual development. After searching for quite a while, I stumbled upon an inconspicuous post title tucked away in a corner of a local parenting forum, Sunshine Nursery, a small and warm growth nest, offering patience and space for every child, limited to 15 children. I clicked in. The post was simple, without flashy promotional photos, just a few candid shots taken with a phone, a cozy, home-like activity room converted from a living room, carpeted with a bookshelf and small tables. A tiny balcony planted with flowers, several snapshots of children doing crafts and playing games under the teacher's guidance, their smiles genuine. The text description was equally unpretentious, emphasizing small class sizes, maximum of 15 children, 2 permanent teachers plus a caregiver, focusing on children's emotions and individual differences, respecting their developmental pace, and advocating for learning through nature and play. The address was in an old neighborhood south of the city. Below were a handful of scattered replies, all from parents. My second child is at Sunshine, and the teachers are truly loving, just like mothers. Principal teacher Monica was previously a key staff member at a large kindergarten and particularly understands children. The place isn't very big, but the children are very happy. My slow-to-warm-up child has become much more outgoing after 2 months there. Sunshine Nursery, the name inexplicably brings a touch of warmth. I noted down the address and contact number. On Monday morning, I told Kathy to take Edward out, didn't specify where. The car drove for over 40 minutes. From the luxury mansions in the northern part of the city to the old neighborhood in the south, the streets grew narrower, lined with aged plane trees. Their branches lush and leafy. Small shops lined the roadside, hardware stores, fruit stalls, tailor shops. The essence of everyday life was palpable. Sunshine Nursery is located on the ground floor of the first building in an old neighborhood by the street. It has a small yard enclosed by wooden railings, planted with sunflowers and greenery, and furnished with 2 small rocking horses. The gate to the yard was open. After parking the car, I held Edward's hand and walked inside. In the yard, several 3- or 4-year-old children, led by a young teacher with a ponytail and a floral apron, were playing with water around a large plastic basin. Small ducks and buckets floated in the water. The children chattered away, scooping and splashing water with their little buckets, their laughter crisp and bright. Edward froze in his tracks instantly. His small hand tightened around mine abruptly, and his body tensed up. The vivid, noisy, and dynamic scene before him clearly exceeded his tiny capacity to cope. Instinctively, he shrank behind me, his wide eyes filled with alarm. Don't be afraid. I crouched down, pulling him in front of me to block part of his view. Look, they're playing with water. That little duck is floating on the water. I pointed at the yellow plastic duck in the water basin. Edward's gaze followed my finger. His eyes locked onto the floating yellow duck. The water rippled in the basin, causing the little duck to sway gently. His tense body seemed to relax slightly. He just kept staring at that little duck. At that moment, the door to the activity room opened. A woman in her 40s, wearing a light gray cotton dress, stepped out. Her expression was gentle, her gaze calm, exuding a composure honed by time. She spotted us immediately, her eyes settling on Edward, who was clinging close to me, only half his face visible. Hello, are you here for a visit? She approached us, her voice soft and warm. Hello, Principal Monica, I'm Freya. We spoke on the phone about visiting this morning. I stood up. That's me. Welcome. Principal Monica smiled, her gaze returning to Edward. Is this your little one, Edward? Right. What a lovely name. She didn't try to approach Edward right away, maintaining a respectful distance. Instead, she bent down slightly to meet his eye level. Hello, Edward. I'm Teacher Monica. Welcome to our little garden. Edward still huddled by my legs, only revealing a pair of wary big eyes as he looked at Principal Monica. Edward is a bit shy, I explained, That's perfectly fine. Principal Monica maintained her warm smile. Every child has their own pace. Here, we let every little one take things slowly at their own rhythm. She pointed toward the water basin area. Those older kids are playing with water. Would Edward like to watch? Or perhaps we could go inside first. There are lots more fun things indoors. Edward didn't move. But his little head turned toward the open door of the activity room. Shall we go inside and take a look first? I asked him softly. He remained silent, but his little hand gently tugged at the hem of my clothes. All right, let's go inside. I took his hand. The activity room was indeed small, but it was thoughtfully arranged. The light wooden floor, low open bookshelves filled with picture books and toys, soft crawling mats and a small tent against the wall. And in the center were several small round tables and chairs just the right height for children. The walls were adorned with the innocent scribbles of the kids. The overall atmosphere was bright, tidy, and warm, like an enlarged living room brimming with childlike charm. There's a faint scent of disinfectant in the air and a hint of freshly baked cookies. Teacher Jane is making cookies with the kids. Principal Monica smiled, pointing to a small adjoining kitchenette through the glass door. You could see a young female teacher guiding 2 or 3 children as they kneaded dough around a small table. The kids' faces were dusted with flour, beaming with joy. In the mornings, we usually have themed activities, like crafts, painting, music and movement, or simple cooking experiences like today. Principal Monica explained. Afternoons are mainly for free play and outdoor time. Weather permitting, we go to the little courtyard or a nearby park. We also weave in story time and snack breaks. The idea is to let children naturally interact with peers and develop skills in a relaxed, happy environment. No pressure, no comparisons. As she spoke, her gaze kept drifting to Edward. He was drawn to a basket in the corner filled with wooden fruit-cutting toys, wooden apples, bananas, watermelons, complete with tiny wooden knives. Does Edward like that? Principal Monica asked softly. Edward didn't answer, but his gaze never left the basket. Principal Monica walked over, picked up a wooden apple and a small wooden knife, and approached. Instead of handing them directly to Edward, she placed them on the small low table in front of him. This apple can be cut, like this. She picked up the little wooden knife and gently sliced through the gap in the middle of the apple, splitting it into 2 halves. Then she put them back together. After demonstrating, she placed the apple and knife on the table, took a step back, and smiled as she watched Edward. Edward looked at the apple on the table, then at Principal Monica, and finally at me. His little face showed no expression, but his eyes were filled with a struggle of longing and hesitation. Go play. I gently nudged his back. He slowly moved to the small table, extending his tiny hand. He first cautiously touched the wooden apple, and only then picked up the small wooden knife, mimicking Principal Monica's actions. He aligned the knife with the groove in the middle of the apple and pressed down firmly. With a soft click, the apple split into 2 halves. Edward's movements froze. He looked at the apple split in 2 in his hand, then at Principal Monica, and then at me. Then, he lowered his head, pressed the 2 halves together, and cut them again, pressed them together, and cut once more, over and over. His movements grew increasingly skilled. So focused it was as if the whole world had narrowed down to just him and that wooden apple. Principal Monica stood nearby, wearing a gentle smile, not making a sound to disturb him. Only after Edward repeated the action more than a dozen times and seemed to grow slightly bored, putting down the apple, did she softly say, Edward cuts so well. There are bananas and watermelons over there too. Would you like to try? Edward followed her pointing finger and looked toward the basket filled with wooden fruits. He hesitated for a moment, then slowly walked over on his own, crouched down, and began picking through the basket. He picked up a yellow banana. Do you need a knife? Principal Monica asked. Edward looked up at her and nodded very, very slowly. Principal Monica smiled and handed him another small wooden knife. I stood aside, watching Edward crouch by the basket, intently cutting wooden fruits. Sunlight streamed through the window, falling on his fine, soft hair. Principal Monica stood not far from him, quietly observing, occasionally handing him tools when needed. No rush, no interference, just gentle companionship. This small, unassuming childcare center carries a soothing energy in the air, unhurried and gentle, like a slow-flowing stream in spring. This is the place. I've made my decision. As the tour concluded, Principal Monica escorted us to the small courtyard by the entrance. Principal Monica, I spoke directly, I'd like to enroll Edward here. He is a bit special. doesn't talk much and takes time to warm up. The teachers might need to pay him extra attention. Principal Monica showed no surprise. Her gaze rested gently yet firmly on Edward, who was being led by Kathy in the yard, intently watching tiny ants on the ground. Ms. Freya, every child is unique. Edward just needs a little more time and space. Here, patience is something we have in abundance. Welcome Edward to our little sunshine family. Thank you, I said sincerely. On the ride back, Edward leaned against me, playing with a small pack of tissues from my bag. He pulled one out, tucked it back in, then pulled it out again, completely absorbed. His little face wore the serious expression of someone exploring a new toy. The sunlight streamed through the car window, warm and comforting, as I watched the lively street scenes flashing by outside. My heart was filled with an unprecedented sense of calm. The first step in Zen parenting is finding the right little pond for him. We've taken that step. 3 days later, Edward officially began his days at Sunshine Nursery. On the first day, I took him there myself. The car stopped outside the old residential area, and holding his hand, we walked along the familiar shade of plane trees toward that small courtyard. Edward walked very slowly, his tiny hand tightly gripping my finger. His fingertips slightly cold, I could feel his nervousness. In the small courtyard, a few early arriving children were already playing on the slide and swings, their clear laughter ringing out. Edward's steps noticeably faltered, and he shrank behind me. Edward is here, came the warm voice of Principal Monica. She emerged from the small activity room with a gentle smile on her face. She didn't approach immediately but stood at the courtyard gate, waving to us. Good morning, Edward. What lovely weather today. Edward hid behind my leg, peeking at Principal Monica with just one eye. Principal Monica didn't mind and said to me with a smile, Ms. Freya, don't worry, leave him to me. Edward, would you like to come inside with Teacher Monica? Let's see if the little turtle has woken up. It ate so many vegetable leaves yesterday, she mentioned, the little turtle. And Edward's grip on my hand seemed to loosen slightly, during yesterday's visit. He had seen the glass tank housing the little turtle in the corner of the small terrace. Go ahead, Edward. I crouched down and gently hugged his small, tense body. Mommy will pick you up this afternoon. Go with Teacher Monica to see the little turtle. Edward looked at me, then at Principal Monica, his big eyes filled with hesitation and attachment so deep it seemed impossible to dissolve. Principal Monica extended her hand, palm up, not reaching to pull him but offering a gentle invitation. Come, Edward. Time seemed to freeze for a few seconds. Finally, Edward very slowly, bit by bit, released my fingers. Instead of taking Principal Monica's hand, he took small steps on his own, head lowered, moving step by step toward Principal Monica, like a cautious little bird leaving its nest for the first time. Principal Monica maintained her smile, not rushing him, and turned to walk half a step ahead, guiding him through the door of the activity room. The moment the door closed, I heard Principal Monica's gentle voice inside. Look, the little turtle really woke up. It's watching us. I stood there, staring at the closed door, my heart a whirlwind of emotions. There was relief, a bittersweet ache of letting go, but mostly a nervous anticipation tangled up inside me. At exactly 4 in the afternoon, I appeared at the gate of the small courtyard. My heart had been pounding the whole time. The activity room door opened. The teachers led the children out one by one, handing them over to their parents. The little ones chattered excitedly, calling, Mommy, Daddy, their cheeks rosy with excitement. Finally, Principal Monica emerged holding Edward's hand. Edward's little face showed no particular expression, but it looked clean and tidy, with his hair neatly in place. When he saw me, he quickened his pace slightly, came to my side, and instinctively grabbed the hem of my clothes with his small hand. Edward did great today, Principal Monica said to me with a smile, her eyes filled with genuine praise. Though he was quiet most of the time, he was observing everything. He joined in the finger rhyme activity and even helped the teacher pick up scattered blocks and put them back in the basket. During snack time, he finished a small bowl of fruit yogurt by himself. He also lay down quietly during nap time. Though he didn't fall asleep, he didn't disturb the other children. She crouched down to meet Edward at eye level. Edward, say goodbye to Mommy, and we'll see you tomorrow, okay? Edward looked at Principal Monica, then at me. His little lips moved slightly, but no sound came out. Yet, very softly and lightly, he gave a small nod. Awesome, see you tomorrow. Principal Monica happily patted his little head. On the way home, I drove while glancing at Edward in the rearview mirror. He leaned back in his child's seat, clutching a neatly folded tissue, the one I had given him that morning as a spare, watching the streets flash by outside the window. His little face remained quiet, but his eyes seemed to carry a hint of something indescribable, relief, more than when we left home that morning. "Edward," I asked softly, "did you have fun at daycare?" He turned his head and looked at me through the rearview mirror. After a few seconds, very slowly, he nodded once. No words like fun were spoken, but a single nod was enough. Days wound up like clockwork, slipping by in tranquility. Edward was dropped off at Sunshine every morning and picked up in the afternoon. He remained that quiet child, yet in that small, warm nursery, subtle changes sprouted like grass after spring rain. Quietly emerging, he began voluntarily helping the caregiver arrange the little chairs neatly. When Principal Monica tells stories, he sits on the small rug. Though he doesn't join the discussion, his eyes remain fixed on the picture book. During craft time, he no longer just watches. Once, Principal Monica handed him a small piece of clay. He silently kneaded it for a long time and finally shaped a crooked little snake, barely recognizable. Placing it gently in Principal Monica's palm, he still rarely speaks. But during snack time, when Principal Monica asked who wanted more cookies, he actually raised his tiny hand ever so slightly in the quiet group. When Principal Monica shared these moments with me over the phone, the joy in her voice was unmistakable. Ms. Freya, Edward's inner strength is slowly emerging. He's learning to blend in. It's slow, but every step is steady. Changes were quietly taking place at home. The children's room was no longer just a cold space filled with expensive toys. I removed those flashy, high-tech toys and replaced them with more open-ended, hands-on items, building blocks, puzzles, modeling clay, paintbrushes, and picture books. There was also a small turtle tank inspired by Sunshine Garden, home to 2 real little turtles. In the evenings, I would sit on the carpet with him. I no longer demanded that he speak or interact. Sometimes we would build with blocks together. I constructed my skyscrapers while he silently stacked his walls. Other times, we would read picture books. I narrated while he listened quietly, his little hands unconsciously fiddling with the corners of the pages. Occasionally, we simply drew quietly side by side. He scribbled lines and shapes no one could decipher, while I sketched simple flowers and grass nearby. A peculiar calm flowed between us. Too many words weren't necessary. Companionship itself became an unspoken understanding. The expression on Kathy's face gradually shifted from initial surprise and concern to acceptance and faint relief. While preparing dinner, she would deliberately ask, "Ma'am, should I steam minced pork with egg custard for the young master today? He seems to like it quite a bit." I even started trying my hand at cooking, not the delicate Western pastries the original host had learned to please Spencer, but the simplest home-style dishes. The first time I stir-fried greens, I added too much salt, making them unbearably salty. Edward scooped a little onto his small spoon and put it in his mouth, his little face immediately scrunching up like a bun, but he didn't spit it out. Instead, he silently picked up his small water cup and took a big sip. Looking at his crumpled little face, I couldn't help but laugh. It was the first genuine smile I'd had since crossing over. He also lifted his little face to look at me, his big eyes reflecting my smile. Then, he lowered his head and continued eating the rice in his bowl that hadn't gotten too much salt, taking small bites. But the corners of his slightly pursed lips seemed to curl up just a tiny bit. Peaceful days flowed like a gentle stream, moving slowly forward, just as I was almost forgetting that I was in a melodramatic novel and forgetting about the male lead named Spencer. The calm was shattered. It was an ordinary Friday evening. The lingering glow of the sunset cast a lazy golden hue over the luxurious living room. Sitting cross-legged on the carpet, I was clumsily trying to fold a frog out of colored paper, something Principal Monica had taught us that afternoon, though I hadn't mastered it as well as Edward had. Edward sat across from me, quietly squeezing a crumpled paper ball I'd folded earlier. Kathy walked over with a plate of sliced fruit and placed it on the side table, her face carrying a hint of hesitation. "Madam," I didn't look up, still wrestling with the colored paper in my hands. "Mr. James just called." Kathy's voice was slightly tense. "He said, he'll be home in half an hour." My hands froze abruptly. The crooked head of the paper frog I was folding got crushed in my grip. "Spencer, he's back." The plot from the book flooded my mind instantly. According to the timeline, it wouldn't be long before he'd show up with Sunny, his first love, to lay his cards on the table. And the original owner of this body would go mad and set everything on fire. my heart started pounding uncontrollably. A chill crept up my spine to the nape of my neck. Got it. I forced my voice to stay steady, putting down the ruined paper frog in my hand and brushing off the paper scraps. There's no avoiding it, what's coming will come, but the Freya now isn't the lunatic from the book. My laid-back, go-with-the-flow parenting life has just gotten on track, and no one's going to ruin it. I took a deep breath and stood up. First, I said to Kathy, prepare dinner, enough for 3 people. Though I wasn't sure if he would eat. Then, I walked over to Edward. He was still clutching that crumpled paper ball, seemingly unaware of the shift in atmosphere. Edward, I crouched down to meet his clear eyes. Later, your dad will be coming home. Edward's little hand froze mid-squeeze. He looked up at me, his large eyes reflecting unmistakable confusion, followed almost immediately by a barely perceptible tension. His small body shrank slightly. Dad. The word felt both unfamiliar and distant to him, likely accompanied by some vague, unpleasant fragments of memory, like the original host's hysterical curses toward Dad. Dad is Spencer, I explained as calmly as possible. He's Edward's father. He hasn't been back in a long time, so Edward might not remember him well. I gently stroked his soft hair. Don't be afraid, Mommy's here. Edward looked at me, his little lips pressed tightly together. He lowered his head, stopped playing with the paper ball, and nervously twisted his small hands together. Half an hour later, steady footsteps echoed in the hallway, followed by the electronic beep of the coded lock being disengaged. The enormous crystal chandelier in the living room shone brilliantly. I sat on the sofa with an open picture book in my hands, pretending to read. Edward sat close beside me, clutching his little brown teddy bear tightly, his small body stiff and straight like a fully drawn bow. Spencer walked in, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark gray suit that accentuated his tall, upright frame. His handsome face carried the aloofness of someone long accustomed to authority, with deep-set eyes, a high-bridged nose, and tightly pressed thin lips. His expression was unreadable. Behind him followed a young man carrying a briefcase, likely his assistant. His gaze swept across the living room like a cold searchlight, finally settling on Edward and me. There was no warmth of reunion in those eyes, only scrutiny, and a trace of something barely perceptible, impatience. Daddy, a crisp, childish little girl's voice suddenly rang out, shattering the stagnant air in the living room. Only then did I notice that behind Spencer was a girl dressed like a little princess, about 4 or 5 years old. With delicate pigtails and wearing a pink frilly dress, like a happy little bird, she darted out from behind Spencer and threw herself at his legs, hugging them. The frost on Spencer's face seemed to melt for a moment as he bent down, picking her up with movements that were somewhat awkward but still gentle. Sonny, say hello. His voice was deep, devoid of much emotion. The little girl, Sonny's daughter, Cindy, mentioned in the book, looked at us curiously, her big eyes blinking sweetly as she chirped, hello, Auntie, hello, little brother. My gaze fell on the arm Spencer used to hold Cindy, then I turned to Edward beside me, clutching his teddy bear tightly, his small face pale with tension, his body stiff as a stone. My heart ached dully, as if struck by something heavy. This was the male lead and his true love's daughter. Meanwhile, his own biological son sat meters away like a stranger, unable to even call him Dad, perhaps not even recognizing him. Spencer held Cindy in his arms, his gaze falling on me again with scrutiny and icy displeasure. Freya, what are you up to this time? Not answering calls, ignoring messages, and sending our child to some third-rate place. His tone carried unmistakable disdain. Sunshine, never even heard of it. The James family's child can't afford such embarrassment. As expected, it was about this. Secretary Peter or the butler must have eventually relayed the message. I gently closed the picture book in my hands and set it aside. Raising my head, I met his intimidating eyes calmly. Edward likes it there, I said softly but clearly. He's doing well there. Good. Spencer curled his lips into a cold smirk, as if he'd heard some joke, tightening his grip around Cindy's arm. So good that he can't even speak. So good that he's like a mute. His gaze swept over Edward, looking at him like a flawed object, with undisguised disappointment and indifference. A son of mine, Spencer, shouldn't be like this. The word mute felt like 2 icy awls, brutally piercing my ears. I saw Edward's body tremble violently. He abruptly lowered his head, pressing the teddy bear tightly against his chest, burying his small face into its soft belly. His tiny shoulders hunched together, like a fatally frightened little animal desperately trying to hide itself. A surge of rage flared up inside me, burning so fiercely that my fingertips went numb. Zen, to hell with Zen. I abruptly stood up, stepping in front of Edward and shielding him with my body from Spencer's piercing, icy gaze. My voice was low but sharp as frost. Spencer, search your conscience and ask yourself, why is Edward in this state? The living room fell dead silent. Kathy and the assistant had already tactfully retreated to a distance. Only Cindy, startled by the sudden tension, shrank closer into Spencer's arms. Spencer frowned deeply, his eyes sharp as daggers. What do you mean by that? What do you mean? I sneered, months of pent-up emotions finally finding an outlet, yet my tone remained restrained, though the implication was crystal clear. From the day our child was born until now, 3 years and 7 months, how many times have you held him? Have you ever fed him even a single bite? Have you read him even one bedtime story? Do you know what he likes to eat? What he's afraid of? Where were you when he was feverish, sick, and crying? Where were you when he crawled, walked, or made his first sounds? My gaze swept over Cindy, dressed like a little princess in his arms, and my voice grew even colder. You were busy being someone else's good father, weren't you? Busy buying the most expensive dolls for your Sonny, sending her to the best international kindergarten, enjoying your happy family life. Spencer's face instantly twisted into an ugly expression, his arms tightening around Cindy. He probably never imagined that Freya, the one he thought only knew how to scream hysterically, would use such calm yet razor-sharp words to tear apart his hypocritical facade. He began to speak. I didn't give him any chance to speak, my gaze fixed on him like nails. Edward can't speak. Yes, his language development is slow. That's because he's never received the responses he deserved since childhood. No one has ever truly listened patiently to what he wanted to say. He's been living as if trapped in a vacuum-sealed bubble. You, Spencer, are the one who put him in that bubble with your own hands, and now you dare blame the person inside for not being able to speak. What right do you have? My voice trembled slightly with emotion, but every word struck with undeniable force. Edward doesn't need some top-tier international kindergarten to decorate the facade of your James family. What he needs is an environment where he can relax, where all his differences are accepted, where he feels safe and receives patience. Sunshine is exactly that kind of place. He's doing well there, 100 times better than in your cold, lifeless home that feels like a luxury showroom. Freya, how dare you? Spencer erupted in fury, veins throbbing at his temples. He put down Cindy from his arms and took an intimidating step forward, his tall frame radiating overwhelming pressure. Who gave you the audacity to speak to me like this? Don't forget your place, my place. I met his gaze without flinching, even tilting my chin up slightly. I'm Edward's mother. Is that position sufficient? I pointed at the small figure still curled up and trembling behind me, protecting my child from being hurt by anyone, including his biological father. That's my only position and stance. My voice was resolute, echoing through the empty living room. Spencer was stunned by the unprecedented, almost fierce determination and protective instinct in my eyes. He looked at me, his gaze swirling with shock, anger, and a hint of an unfamiliar disbelief. It was as if he was truly seeing the woman named Freya before him for the first time. He opened his mouth to speak, but his eyes involuntarily drifted over my shoulder, landing on the small figure curled up in the corner of the sofa behind me, clutching a teddy bear tightly. Her face buried and invisible, only her thin shoulders trembling slightly. That figure was so small, so fragile, brimming with silent fear and despair. I seemed to freeze. The fury surging across Spencer's face seemed to hit pause, then gradually faded, revealing a complicated blankness. His tightly pressed thin lips twitched slightly, as if he wanted to say something, but ultimately no sound emerged, only his gaze, for the first time, truly and lingeringly settled on Edward. No longer looking at an object, but with a belated, weighty scrutiny. Just then, wah, a sharp, fear-filled wail suddenly pierced the air. It's Cindy, utterly terrified by the tense standoff. Her little face turned deathly pale. Tears rolled down like broken strings of pearls as she cried, stretching her tiny hands toward Spencer. Daddy, Daddy, hold me. Cindy's scared. Scared, the cry acted like a key, instantly shattering the suffocating silence in the living room and completely erasing the last trace of complex emptiness on Spencer's face. He almost immediately withdrew his gaze from Edward, swiftly bending down to scoop up Cindy, who was crying uncontrollably. back into his arms. His movements carried unmistakable comfort and tenderness. "Cindy, don't be scared, Daddy's here," he murmured, patting her back, his voice low but noticeably softer. His eyes instantly shifted back to that warm, concerned gaze, a stark contrast to the icy scrutiny he had directed at Edward moments ago. Without so much as another glance at me or Edward, he strode toward the hallway with Cindy still sobbing in his arms, leaving behind only a cold command hanging in the air. "Assistant Zhang, arrange a car to take Cindy back to Miss Sunny." The sound of footsteps faded away, and the front door opened and closed. Only Edward and I remained in the living room. The anger and courage that had sustained me during my confrontation with Spencer seemed to vanish instantly. My legs gave way, and I collapsed onto the carpet beside the sofa. My back was drenched in cold sweat. My heart was still pounding violently in my chest, throbbing so hard it ached against my ribs. Just a little more, just a little more. Would that insane confrontation and destruction from the book have played out prematurely? I gasped for air, trying to calm my frantic heartbeat and the trembling in my fingertips. It took me a long while before I remembered the small figure behind me. I turned around. Edward remained frozen in that position, his tiny body curled up in the corner of the wide sofa, like a young animal abandoned by the world. He buried his face tightly in the belly of that brown teddy bear, his small hands gripping the bear's arms with all his might, his knuckles turning white. His entire body was trembling, silently, violently shaking. No cries, only the most suppressed, faint, broken sobs rising from the depths of his throat, like the desperate whimpers of a wounded animal. "Edward," my voice was hoarse, trembling in a way I hadn't even noticed. I crawled over on all fours, carefully approaching him. I didn't dare hug him immediately, afraid of startling him. I could only extend my hand, placing it with extreme gentleness and caution on his violently trembling, frail little back. "Edward, don't be scared. It's okay." My voice choked up, my throat blocked by something. "The bad man is gone. Mommy's here. Mommy's right here." The small body beneath my palm trembled so violently, those silent sobs were like a blunt knife, sawing back and forth across my heart. "Daddy is bad, bad man gone," I repeated, my voice cracking with tears, clumsily trying to comfort him with the simplest words. "Edward, not scared. Mommy protect you. Mommy fight bad man." I babbled incoherently while slowly, ever so slowly, gathering his trembling little body into my arms. He didn't struggle, nor did he stiffen as he usually would. Instead, like clutching the only floating log, his small frame shuddered violently before burying himself completely against me, his tiny hands gripping the fabric of my shirt desperately. The suppressed sobs finally broke free from his throat, transforming into intermittent, hoarse wails filled with immense fear and anguish. Wah, wah, ah, ah. Not the kind of crying that comes from a child throwing a tantrum. It was the eruption of fear, grievance, and unease that had been suppressed for far too long, bursting forth under immense stimulation, a wail from the depths of the soul. Scalding tears instantly soaked through the clothes on my chest. I held the little one tightly in my arms as they cried their heart out, my arms squeezing so tight it was as if I wanted to meld them into my very bones and blood, shielding them from all the harm and coldness of the outside world with my own body. "Cry, Edward, let it out. It'll be better once you cry." My cheek pressed against his soft hair damp with sweat and tears, my own tears uncontrollably streaming down. "Mom's here. Mom's holding Edward. Don't be afraid. It's all over." In the living room, only the muffled sobs of mother and son intertwined remained. It was unclear how much time had passed. Outside the window, the sky had completely darkened. The glow of the crystal chandelier seemed especially cold and distant. The crying in my arms gradually quieted, turning into sniffles. Edward had cried himself out, his small body limp against me, still hiccuping occasionally, his little face streaked with tears, eyes swollen red like peaches. His tiny hands, which had been clutching my clothes tightly, finally loosened their grip slightly. Kathy tiptoed over, carrying a cup of warm water and a heated damp towel. Her eyes also reddened. I took the towel and carefully wiped Edward's face. When the warm towel touched his swollen eyes, he flinched slightly but didn't pull away. After cleaning his little face, I fed him a few sips of water. He drank slowly, his long eyelashes still glistening with tears. "Madam, dinner," Kathy whispered. "Not tonight." I shook my head, my voice hoarse. "Just simmer some millet porridge and keep it warm. I'll take him upstairs to rest first." "Okay," Kathy quickly agreed, holding Edward, who was still weak and softly leaning against my shoulder. I walked up the stairs step by step, his little head rested on my shoulder, his warm breath brushing against the side of my neck. Back in the nursery, I didn't turn on the main light, only switching on a soft glowing moon-shaped nightlight in the corner. I gently laid him down on the small bed and tucked him in with a thin blanket. His swollen, red eyes looked up at me, still filled with lingering fear and an overwhelming sense of vulnerable dependence. Sleep now, Edward. I sat by the bed, gently patting him. Mommy is right here, not going anywhere. I'll watch over you as you sleep. He reached out his tiny hand, fumblingly grasping one of my fingers resting by the bedside, holding on tight. I didn't pull my hand away, letting him keep his grip. With my other hand, I gently patted his small body, humming a tuneless lullaby that even I didn't recognize. A long time passed. His swollen, red eyelids finally closed heavily, and his breathing became even and steady, yet that little hand clutching my finger still hadn't let go. Outside the window, the city lights flickered on and off. I sat in the dim light, watching Edward's faintly furrowed little brow even in sleep, feeling only the cold embers left in my heart. Spencer's appearance was like an unexpected hailstorm, shattering the fragile peace we had carefully built. It also made me see reality clearly. As long as I still bore the title of Mrs. James, as long as I remained within the track set by this novel, true peace would remain out of reach. The premise of raising a child with detachment is having a small nest truly our own, far from the eye of the storm. Divorce. We must divorce, and it has to be fast, before the plot completely falls apart. The next day was Saturday. The sunlight was beautiful, streaming in through the gaps in the curtains. Edward woke up later than usual. When he opened his eyes, the swelling had gone down considerably, but his spirits were noticeably wilted, like a little seedling touched by frost. He sat quietly on the bed, hugging his teddy bear, his gaze somewhat vacant. Edward, how about Mommy takes you out to play today? I tried to keep my voice sounding cheerful. We'll go somewhere far away to see big airplanes. Edward looked up at me with his big eyes, devoid of much sparkle, but he nodded very, very slowly. After yesterday's storm, he seemed to need a little more certainty and security. I sprang into action immediately, packed a simple backpack with a few changes of clothes for Edward, a water bottle, some snacks, and his comfort teddy bear. Left Kathy a note, just saying I was taking Edward out for a couple of days to clear his mind. Then, I drove off with Edward in the car, heading south. Our destination was a newly built large theme park in a neighboring city. It wasn't the weekend, so the crowd was sparse. The giant Ferris wheel, the brightly colored fairy tale castle, the floats playing cheerful music, everything was filled with dreamlike bustle. I bought 2 tickets and walked in holding Edward's hand. He was clearly stunned by the enormous, colorful world before him, his little mouth slightly agape, his big eyes filled with wonder and a hint of hesitation. His tiny hand tightly gripped my finger. Look, a big airplane. I pointed to a simulated flight experience attraction in the distance. A massive replica airplane cabin model hung suspended mid-air. Edward's gaze was firmly captivated. I led him over. There were few people in line. The staff helped fasten our seatbelts. The cabin started up, slowly rising and rotating, simulating the sensation of flight. The massive screen displayed realistic blue skies with white clouds and an aerial view of the city. When the plane reached its highest point and the view suddenly opened up, revealing the entire amusement park below, Edward's tense little body finally relaxed slightly. He pressed himself against the transparent cabin wall, his small face almost touching it, his wide eyes unblinking as he gazed at the miniature castle, the speeding little trains on the tracks, and the ant-like crowds below. His eyes reflected the vast world outside the window, sparkling brightly. We're flying, I whispered. Edward turned his head and looked at me. Sunlight streamed through the glass, illuminating his face. He gazed at me for a few seconds, then, very slowly, the corners of his lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smile, like a small flower quietly blooming amidst ruins. At that moment, my heart was flooded with overwhelming warmth and bittersweetness. It was worth it, everything was worth it. We spent most of the day playing in the amusement park, riding the carousel. He chose a small white horse, gripping the pole tightly, his little face still serious but his eyes sparkling, watching a cheerful parade performance. A clown actor gave him a balloon dog, which he clutched tightly in his hand. And digging in the sandpit in the children's area for a long time, he dug a deep hole and carefully buried the balloon dog inside, leaving only its head exposed. He still didn't speak, but the timidity and emptiness in his eyes were gradually replaced by curiosity and focus. His little face also gained more vivid expressions. In the evening, we had dinner at the theme restaurant in the amusement park. He finished all the smiley face potato cakes and chicken nuggets from a small kid's meal. At night, we stayed at the theme hotel in the park. The room was designed like a forest cabin. Edward was particularly fascinated by the small bed shaped like a tree hollow, climbing in and out repeatedly. I sat watching him from the small sofa nearby, took out my phone, and dialed Peter's secretary's number. Secretary Peter, it's me, Freya, madam, your instructions please. Secretary Peter's voice remained as steady as ever, betraying no emotion. Please convey to Mr. James. My voice was calm and measured, that I want a divorce. There was a few seconds of silence on the other end of the line. Clearly, even the well-trained Secretary Peter was startled by this sudden request. Madam, are you certain? His voice carried a hint of caution. Absolutely certain. My tone was resolute. The terms are simple. Edward's custody goes to me. This villa belongs to me. It was given to Edward by James's family, so legally he holds a share. Additionally, a one-time payment covering Edward's living expenses and education fund until he turns 18, at the highest standard. As for the rest of the assets, I want none of it. I paused, then added, tell him I only want Edward and peace. If he disagrees, or tries to fight me for custody, my voice turned icy. I wouldn't mind having a few friends discuss how he spent all these years ignoring his own son while doting on someone else's daughter. CEO's devoted father image must be quite valuable. There was an even longer silence on the other end. Secretary Peter's breathing seemed to grow quieter. Understood, madam, he finally spoke, his voice regaining its professional composure. I will relay your message to Mr. James word for word. Good, I'll await his reply. I hung up the phone decisively, putting down my phone. I noticed Edward had stopped his treehole climbing game at some point. He stood by his little bed, clutching his teddy bear, watching me quietly. Under the dim light, his large eyes were crystal clear. Edward, I reached out to him. Come to mommy. He walked over, placed the teddy bear aside, climbed onto my lap, and sat down, his little body nestling softly against me. I held him, gently rocking. The room was quiet, with only the faint sound of music from the amusement park's night event drifting in through the window. Edward. I lowered my head, brushing my cheek against his soft hair. My voice as light as a sigh. From now on, it'll just be mommy and Edward, just the two of us, living together. Okay. The little body in my arms nestled quietly against me. After a long while, I felt him nod ever so slightly in my arms. A week later, Spencer's reply arrived. It wasn't from him personally, but documents delivered by Peter's secretary, a drafted divorce agreement, along with a detailed supplementary contract. The terms were almost identical to what I had proposed. Custody of Edward would go to me, the current residence villa would be transferred to my name, specified as the living accommodation provided by the James family for Edward, a lump sum payment substantial enough to cover Edward's needs until adulthood and completion of higher education, other marital assets, including some jewelry, stocks, etc., I voluntarily relinquished. The supplementary agreement was far more stringent. It required me to promise that after the divorce, I would not exploit the identities of Mrs. James or Spencer's ex-wife in any form for personal gain or to stir public opinion. I would not instill any negative information about his biological father in Edward. I would not change Edward's surname without Spencer's written consent. And Spencer retained the right to visit Edward at specific times, such as holidays. With the details to be negotiated between both parties, Secretary Peter stood in the living room, reciting the terms like an emotionless machine. Mr. James's position is that if you agree to these terms, the formalities will be expedited once you sign. The funds will be transferred within 3 business days after the formalities are completed. I picked up the thick agreement and flipped to the last page. The space for the Party B signature was blank. On the Party A side, Spencer's flamboyant signature was already in place. Looking at that familiar yet distant signature, I felt eerily calm, even amused. He had agreed, after all, with money and a cold, empty house, he had bought his way out of his final legal responsibilities, and potential troubles, toward his own son. As for visitation rights, just empty words on paper, meant to appease outsiders. Did he really think he'd ever want to see Edward? That's fine too, clean and neat. Pen, I extended my hand. Secretary Peter immediately handed me a pen. Without the slightest hesitation, I signed, Freya, in the Party B signature space. The handwriting was completely different from the original owner's. Clean and decisive. After signing, I put down the pen, picked up that supplementary agreement, didn't even glance at it, tore it straight in half, then into shreds. Snow-white paper fragments fluttered down onto the carpet. Secretary Peter's pupils contracted sharply, but professionalism kept him silent. Tell him, I said to Secretary Peter, my voice clear, Edward is my son. How to teach him, how to raise him, is my business as his mother. It's not for an outsider to meddle. Visitation, he can bring it up when he remembers he has a son. I tossed the signed divorce agreement back to Secretary Peter. Now, please take your Spencer's belongings and leave my house. The procedures were completed surprisingly fast. Perhaps Spencer was also eager to rid himself of us. This troublesome mother and son pair. When I received that dark red divorce certificate, I stood at the entrance of the Civil Affairs Bureau, looking at the two large headshots pasted side by side, Spencer still handsome and aloof, while I, Freya, wore an expression of post-liberation calm. The sunlight was a bit harsh, so I raised my hand to shield my eyes, feeling an unprecedented lightness in my heart. The dark cloud hanging over my head had finally dispersed. The money arrived quickly. Staring at the long string of zeros in my bank account, I felt nothing. This was simply the security Edward deserved. The first thing I did was contact Teacher Wendy and Principal Monica. In the cozy little office at Sunshine, I got straight to the point. Teacher Wendy, Principal Monica, I'd like to make a personal donation to Sunshine Kindergarten. The funds will be used to improve the facilities, add more special education teaching tools and resources, and increase the teachers' compensation. I looked at them. I hope this place can always remain as warm and inclusive as it is now, welcoming more children like Edward who need time and space. Wendy and Principal Monica exchanged glances, both seeing shock and emotion reflected in each other's eyes. Ms. Freya, thank you so much, Principal Monica said excitedly. We'll definitely put this money to good use. Just call me Freya. I smiled. This money isn't given for free. I have a small request. Please go ahead. I'd like to hold an honorary position at the kindergarten. I pointed to myself. Something like, special parent advisor, no salary needed, and I won't interfere with your normal work. Just come by occasionally to help out, lend a hand, and play with the kids, and maybe, secretly learn a thing or two about childcare. I winked. Wendy and Principal Monica both laughed. You're most welcome. Principal Monica extended her hand with a smile. Consultant Freya, looking forward to working with you. Wendy also nodded with a smile. Edward's mom, welcome aboard. As we stepped out of Sunshine Kindergarten, the sunlight was just right. I looked up at the sky, a deep, deep blue. A new life has begun. Days have completely settled into a peaceful and warm rhythm. Edward and I moved out of that enormous, cold villa and bought a spacious, bright duplex penthouse in an upscale neighborhood near the Sunshine Daycare Center. It has a large terrace where we can grow flowers and gaze at the stars. I personally handled the interior design, opting for a warm Scandinavian wood style, filled with soft cushions, bright colors, and Edward's favorite play corners. There isn't a single trace of Spencer here, only the cozy, lived-in warmth that belongs to us as mother and son. Edward continues to attend Sunshine. He's still not the most outgoing child, but the changes in him are unmistakable. When Principal Monica greeted him with, "Good morning," he would respond with a slightly clearer breathy voice. Good. He would take the initiative to help the caregiver distribute snacks. He even made a regular friend, a little girl named Molly who was also a bit slow to warm up. The two often sat quietly in the reading corner reading picture books together, or dug holes in the sandpit side by side. Though they barely spoke, there was a wonderful tacit understanding between them. The biggest surprise happened on an ordinary afternoon. As a special consultant, I was helping organize the newly arrived picture books at Sunshine Garden. Under Teacher Wendy's guidance, Edward and several other children were playing a simple game of passing messages. The teacher would whisper a word into one child's ear, and that child would then pass it on to the next. When it was Edward's turn, Molly leaned close to his ear and whispered softly, "Apple." Edward lowered his head, his small hands clutching the hem of his shirt. Everyone waited quietly. After a few seconds, he looked up at the next child and moved his lips slightly. A clear voice, though not loud, was audible enough for everyone nearby to hear. Apple, not a whisper. It was a genuinely spoken word. In that instant, the entire activity room fell silent. Teacher Wendy covered her mouth, her eyes instantly reddening. Molly's eyes widened. The other children also stared blankly at Edward. I also stopped what I was doing, feeling as if my heart were tightly gripped by a warm hand. Edward seemed a bit flustered by everyone's reaction, his little face turning slightly red before he quickly lowered his head again. Wow, Edward is amazing. Teacher Wendy was the first to react. Clapping her hands excitedly, Edward can talk now. Molly joined in, clapping her hands too. The other children also clapped and cheered along somewhat bewilderedly. The small activity room was filled with the innocent yet enthusiastic applause and laughter of the children. Edward's little head hung even lower, but I noticed his small mouth corners were struggling, bit by bit, to curve upward. It was a genuine smile, one tinged with shyness and joy. Sunlight streamed through the large window, falling on his fine, soft hair and casting a warm golden halo around him. At that moment, I knew all the storms and struggles were worth it. Autumn passed and winter came. In the blink of an eye, it was the end of the semester at Sunshine Nursery. The nursery organized a small parent-child event combined with a New Year celebration. The venue was that cozy activity room. The small space was decorated festively with ribbons and balloons. Parents sat cross-legged on the carpeted floor while the children, dressed in their favorite outfits, prepared to perform short programs under the teacher's guidance. I sat among the parents, watching Edward. He wore the new dark blue sweater I had bought him, which made his little face look fair and clean. He stood with Molly and a few other children as Teacher Wendy gave them final words of encouragement. They are going to perform a very simple finger rhyme, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. The music starts, and the soft sound of piano flows through the small activity room. The children follow Teacher Wendy's movements, clumsily mimicking them. Some move quickly, some slowly, some forget the actions, and some are too busy looking at their parents in the audience. Edward stands in the middle. His movements aren't smooth, his little hands occasionally pausing, his face serious with concentration, but he tries hard to keep up with the rhythm, diligently imitating Teacher Wendy's gestures. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. His gaze didn't linger on any parent in the audience, focusing solely on following Teacher Wendy, as if the whole world had narrowed down to just him and this nursery rhyme. The performance was brief and ended quickly. The children held hands and bowed amidst the parents' applause. Edward also gave a slight bow, his little face expressionless but his eyes sparkling. Parents began mingling and chatting freely. I stood up, intending to fetch some snacks for Edward. Just as I reached the long table with the food, I overheard hushed whispers from a few parents behind me. Their voices were low, but against the lively background noise, the words still reached my ears clearly. That's the child, right, the one who hardly ever speaks. I heard his family has quite a background. They used to live near Cloud Peak, the top-tier luxury residential area in the north of the city. TSK, he does seem well-behaved, but his reactions seem a bit slower than other kids. His mother is quite attentive though, often helping out at the kindergarten. Sigh, what's the use of coming from a wealthy family for a child like this? In the future, it's probably going to be tough. Their words carried that unconscious, condescending pity and self-righteous judgment. My footsteps halted. A familiar surge of anger instantly welled up in my heart, but it was quickly suppressed. What's the point of arguing with someone like this? Not worth it. I picked up a small plate of sliced fruit and turned to leave. Just then, a childish yet unusually clear and loud voice suddenly rang out behind me, like a small stone thrown into calm waters. Don't talk about my mom. The entire activity room fell silent in an instant. All eyes followed the sound. Edward, like an enraged little lion, broke free from Teacher Wendy's grasp and stomped over to the parents who had been gossiping moments ago. His small face flushed crimson, his chest heaving violently. Those usually quiet eyes now burned with fierce anger and unprecedented courage. Spreading his tiny arms like a mother hen protecting her chicks, he positioned himself between me and those parents, tilting his little face upward. He mustered every ounce of strength in his body and shouted with crystal-clear emphasis, word by word. My mom is the best. I am not slow. Every word struck like a tiny hammer against the silent air, landing heavily upon my heart as well. The activity room fell utterly silent. Everyone was stunned. Even those gossiping parents flushed red and pale by turns, overcome with embarrassment. Teacher Wendy was the first to react. She hurried over and gently took Edward's hand. Edward, it's all right, it's all right. But Edward stubbornly shook off Teacher Wendy's hand, for the first time ever. Still standing guard before me like a little soldier, he raised his head defiantly, glaring at those adults with tightly clenched fists, repeating, "My mom is the best, I'm not slow." My vision blurred instantly, my throat felt blocked by something scorching, rendering me unable to utter a word. I crouched down and opened my arms. Edward suddenly turned around and threw himself into my embrace. His small body still trembling slightly from excitement and anger, he clung tightly to my neck. Burying his burning little face in the crook of my neck, "Mommy, Mommy," he called softly, his voice choked with tears. No longer a vague whisper but a crystal clear cry, "Mommy's here, Mommy's here." I held his tiny body tightly against me, this little warrior who had charged into battle for me. As tears streamed down uncontrollably and my voice cracked with emotion, "Edward is the best. Mommy knows it all." The surrounding parents snapped out of their daze and began applauding one after another. The applause was warm and sincere, filled with emotion and admiration. Teacher Wendy and Principal Monica also had tears in their eyes as they joined in the clapping. The few parents who had been whispering retreated silently to the corners amid the applause, their faces flushed with shame, holding Edward in my arms. I could feel the warmth and strength emanating from his tiny body. In that moment, all the grievances, anger, and shadows of the past were dispelled by this radiant warmth. My Edward, it's not that he can't speak, he simply reserves his most precious voice for the person he most wants to protect. The warm winter sun streamed through the bright windows, filling the entire activity room and bathing us, mother and son locked in a tight embrace, bright, warm, and brimming with hope. The little tomato seedlings on the balcony had grown taller again, their tender green leaves swaying gently in the early summer breeze. Edward, dressed in a tank top and shorts, squatted beside the flower pot, carefully watering each seedling with a small blue watering can clutched in his tiny hands. "Here, water." He pointed at one of the seedlings with slightly wilted leaves, looked up at me, his little face filled with earnest concern. His pronunciation had become much clearer compared to a few months ago. "All right, let's give it a bit more." Sitting on the wicker chair beside him with a gardening book in hand, I responded with a smile. Edward nodded and focused on the little seedling, spraying it a few more times. The fine mist refracted tiny rainbows in the sunlight. The doorbell rang. "Edward, go open the door and see if it's Molly," I said, putting down the book. Molly lived downstairs, and the two kids often visited each other. Edward put down the small spray bottle and toddled off toward the living room with his short little legs, making pattering sounds. I got up and followed. The door opened. Standing outside wasn't Molly with her pigtails, but a tall figure, Spencer. He seemed to have just come from some formal occasion, dressed in a crisp dark suit with his hair meticulously combed. In his hand, he carried an exquisitely packaged toy box that looked undeniably expensive. His gaze swept past Edward, who had opened the door, and landed directly on me, carrying a complex, scrutinizing weight. The moment Edward saw the person at the door, the smile vanished from his little face. Like a startled fawn, he took a sudden step back, turned, and bolted, quickly hiding behind me. His small hands clutched tightly at my pant leg as he buried his face out of sight. His tiny body began trembling slightly again. The atmosphere in the living room instantly plummeted to freezing point. Spencer seemed unprepared for Edward's reaction. His expression stiffened momentarily, his brows instinctively furrowing. He glanced at the small figure hiding behind me, only a tuft of hair visible, then turned his gaze to me, his voice low and unreadable. "Just passing by, wanted to see him." He lifted the toy box in his hand slightly, brought him something. I looked at him, feeling utterly calm inside, even somewhat amused. "Passing by, wanted to see," such casually phrased charity, no need. My voice was flat, betraying neither joy nor anger. "He lacks nothing." Spencer's frown deepened, clearly displeased with my attitude. His gaze once again fell on Edward behind me, carrying that habitual, condescending scrutiny. "He, still like this, still like this." "Like what?" "That he still won't rush over to sweetly call you daddy, or that he's still afraid of you." A chill spread through the air. I bent down and picked up the trembling Edward behind me. He immediately clung to my neck like a little koala, burying his face in the crook of my shoulder, leaving only a resistant back of his head visible to the person at the door. "Mr. James," I said, holding Edward and meeting Spencer's gaze directly, my voice clear and distant. "I believe the divorce agreement and the addendum, though I tore it up." He understood the gist, made it very clear. The premise of visitation rights is mutual agreement. I'm sorry, but neither Edward nor I have time today, nor is it convenient. I paused, looking into his bottomless eyes that were now swirling with displeasure and some complex emotion, then added word by word, also, please make sure to contact me before coming in the future. I don't want your uninvited visits to scare my child again. Spencer's face darkened completely. He stared at me. His gaze sharp as a knife and tinged with offended anger. He had probably never been so directly turned away before, especially by his ex-wife, whom he had once discarded like trash. He opened his mouth as if to say something. Mommy, Edward's muffled, tearful voice came from my embrace, his little arms holding me even tighter. Scared? Go, okay, don't be scared. We'll make the uncle leave. I gently patted Edward's back, but my gaze remained calmly fixed on Spencer. Silently issuing the order to leave, Spencer's eyes darted between my face and Edward's resistant little head for a few seconds. In the end, he said nothing, only his expression grew more inscrutable. He gave me a deep look, one that no longer held the previous disdain, but instead carried a trace of curiosity and an incomprehensible complexity. Then, without another word, he turned and strode away. The heavy footsteps faded away at the elevator entrance, holding Edward in my arms. I walked to the door and gently closed it with a soft click, shutting out the cold world outside as well. All right, the bad person is gone, I said, carrying Edward back to the balcony. I placed him on the small stool and handed him his little watering can. Look, the tomato seedlings are still waiting for Edward to water them. Edward clutched the watering can tightly, glancing nervously at the closed front door and then at the vibrant tomato seedlings basking in the sunlight. His tense little body gradually relaxed. He turned to look at me, his big eyes still glistening with unshed tears, and asked softly, Mommy, not going. I crouched down in front of him, speaking earnestly and word by word. Mommy will never go. Mommy will always be here, staying with Edward, watching our little tomato grow. Edward looked at me, for a long time, then, he stretched out his small hand, not to grab my clothes, but to gently, cautiously, touch my cheek, a warm, soft sensation. He pursed his lips slightly, as if making up his mind about something, then spoke in a clear and earnest voice, Edward, protect Mommy. Sunlight fell on his tender yet incredibly serious little face, casting a warm golden glow over it. I smiled, tears welled up unexpectedly, but I blinked them away quickly. I reached out and tightly grasped his small hand, still smudged with a bit of dirt. Okay, my voice carried both laughter and a sob. Let's protect the little tomatoes together. The breeze swept across the balcony, causing the tender green tomato seedlings to sway gently, as if silently agreeing. After hearing the story above, what are your thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments section. Looking forward to hearing from you. If you liked this story, don't forget to like it, share it, and subscribe to my channel. See you next time.